So thank you so much for coming back and interviewing again.
Thanks for inviting me.
The 412 writers have been reading your essay openings, and obviously one of the questions about reading this is, why are we reading essays by a poet and not poems by a poet? So before I even ask you about that, is there anything that you feel is pertinent for readers to know when approaching this work?
I think most of it is in the essay itself, like, the circumstances under which it was written, being that I was not sleeping for a period of time. I think that maybe something that might be interesting is just that I come from a background, a history background, so I like doing research. I do a lot of research. I tend to get sucked into, which is actually why I wasn't that great as a historian, because I would always go off on these tangents, and my history professors would say, well, that's interesting but not related. You need to come back to like what it is you're primarily studying, and I always wanted to go elsewhere. So I think though that desire to research is something that I hadn't had a lot of time for when my kids were really young, but I've started to have more time for now, so it's, I think, why I'm returning to essays. And I think I just have that desire to research that I've always had. It's still there.
That was something interesting I found reading it, was the range of historical references and cultural references, and kind of high and low, right? So we go from anything as, deep as the Vietnam War to anything as elevated as contemporary poets and Descent of Alette and Alice Notley, but then also we're talking about like the porn movie industry in Britain. How do you find those connections get made, or why such a range?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it has to do with coming upon them, unexpectedly, and liking that feeling of excitement that one gets when one comes upon something that seems outside of the realm of the original inquiry. And so, coming upon, I knew I would write about the Vietnam War, but that was one of the few things I knew that I'd write about in the essay. I knew I'd write about sleep, and I knew I'd write about tunnels, and I knew I'd write about the Vietnam War. Almost everything else was probably a surprise. I think it is a matter of just coming upon something that you didn't expect to find and indulging oneself in it.
How did you go about writing the essays? Was it very research-based, or what was the process like?
Yeah, it was really research-based. Sort of hard to remember, since I was like in a state of complete and utter chaos emotionally and mentally at the time, and just everything seemed to kind of, and in a way that was kind of, I think, what allowed me to write the essays. I would not recommend depriving oneself of sleep, but I had finally come upon a doctor who was helping me, and he suggested this therapy called sleep deprivation therapy. So, and one of the things about it was that you'd stay up. Say you wanted to get up at 3 and you were only able to sleep 3 hours at a time. You couldn't go to bed, or you wanted to get up at 6. You were only sleeping 3 hours. You wouldn't allow yourself to go to bed till 3 a.m. But you couldn't watch TV. You couldn't do anything incredibly stimulating to the eyes, or so I was reading. I was just reading, but also reading in a very altered state. So I think. I would take notes as I was reading at night. I couldn't write at night, because then I wouldn't be able to go to sleep, because that's also stimulating. Not that reading isn't, but it's a different kind of stimulation. And so then I would write in the mornings when I had a little bit of sleep, after a little bit of sleep. And then, so I had a lot of notes. I don't know, hundreds of pages of notes probably. And probably twice, the essay was probably twice as long at one point too, because I tend to overwrite, and then I just cut back as much as I can.